Alright, Dave here, talking about collision layers in Unreal, specifically custom collision layers in Maya. And before I get there, let's just kind of talk about what collision layers are. So if I hit play, you can see that I've got these two motorcycles in here, and if I hit play, then my character is going to kind of walk over here and it can kind of push these objects around. And these are custom objects that I created in Maya. And you can see that when this falls, okay, and if I push this a little bit further, okay, like that, it's very awkward how it's sitting. And if I push this one around, I can see that I'm getting a lot more natural way that it's falling. Okay, let's kind of talk about that. Why this one falls kind of naturally. It looks like it's, you know, hitting on the handlebars, and this one looks like it's kind of floating. So if I hit escape, oh, okay, and I've already imported two of these. One I'm going to say with auto collision and one with custom collision. So if I go to the one with auto collision, and if I double click on it, this is that motorcycle. And if I go to collision at the top here and go to simple collision, this green box is actually what's being calculated for the collision. And this was automatically generated by Unreal. And now you can kind of picture that when I flip that motorcycle upside down, it was balancing on this green top face here. Okay, so it makes a little bit more sense when we see these collision. If I look at the other one, if I go to my other one that I made a custom collision, and now if I go to simple collision here, you can see that these green lines, okay, in other words, this custom collision is a lot tighter to the geometry of the bike. Okay, so that invisible geometry, that's what's actually being calculated as far as when something collides, when the bike falls down, when it gets shot, when a character runs into it, that type of thing. So let's talk about how to make a custom collision and how to import that custom collision into Unreal. So I'm going to go into Maya, and I have the bike set up here. Now, granted, it's all these silly colors, and the only reason that I have it like that is I have the UVs set up where I can see that all of this object on the blue is on one UV map. All of the objects on this UV and this UV and this UV, I can see that they're all taking up this space. So if your object has all its UVs laid out in this area here, okay, you can see that mine would be considered overlapping right now. You would have even an easier scenario than I have. But I'm going to kind of show it with a little bit of complexity because if you ever run into this scenario, it'll kind of help you figure things out. So let's get started. So if I simply import this motorcycle right now, just as is, okay, you'll notice that it's in a group over here in the outliner. And if I open this up, there's a lot of different parts. Okay, these are individual parts, a lot of individual parts here. And I can see that they're all kind of grouped under these categories. So just as it is now, I'm going to go to File, Export All, and I'm going to go to Unreal Collision, and I'm going to just save this as FBX. I'm going to call this No Collision, okay? And it's really No Custom Collision, and I'm just going to call that 001. No Collision 001, Export All. Now, if I go into Unreal, and if I go to third person, I like to have a third person so I can kind of interact and kind of push it around. So if you don't have that, you can go to File, New Project, and when you're here, you can go to Games, and then you can just select third person. Okay, since I already have it, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do it right here. And to keep it simple, instead of kind of importing it and just kind of going all over the place, I'm going to right-click in this bottom area down here in the content browser, go to New Folder, and I'm going to call this Example. I'm going to double-click in Example, and then that's where I'm going to import it. So I'm going to go File, and I'm just going to delete these bikes so we don't get confused. So I can just select them and hit the delete key. Okay, great. Now I've got nothing in here. And in this example folder, I'm going to go right here to add import, import, up here where it says import asset, and I'm going to go look for Unreal Collision. There it is, FBX No Collision 001. And if I bring that in, here's a few things that I want to point out. On the FBX import options, it'll look like this. I can see right here under Mesh, and if that's not expanded, I'm just going to click on this arrow. I can see Generate Missing Collision. And if I hover over that, you can see that if it's checked, the collision will automatically be generated. Okay, so I want to, in this case, since I didn't make a custom collision in Maya, I'm going to do that. And I also want to open this up here, and I want to make sure that Combined Meshes is checked. Because I have a lot of things, I want to make sure that that's checked. And you can see how it's kind of hidden in there. It's not very obvious. Okay, so Combined Meshes. And now I'm going to go ahead and hit Import. And what that's going to do, it's going to import the mesh, and then it's Unreal is going to try to determine how to make the collision layer for that object. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of time here. Once it's imported, okay, there it is, I can see that these are the 4 different materials. Don't worry about that. I've got another video that I'll actually link at the bottom to show how to plug in materials into Unreal. But let's just go ahead and kind of look at it for the collision layer. And if I double click on this icon right now of the bike, I can look here at the collisions. So if I go here, Simple Collision, that is what Maya automatically generated. Okay, and if I show the complex collision, this is a little bit more complex. It doesn't need to be that complex. It doesn't also need to be this simple. Okay, so I'm going to try to make something in between, something that is close to this shape but simple enough for Unreal to understand. So to do that, I'm going to go into Maya. And once again, I feel like I've got all these parts and all this stuff here. So I'm just going to simplify this object right now. And I recommend saving your file so it doesn't have, so in case something gets screwed up, you can always go back. But I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to Mesh, Combine. So all this stuff on one UV map, I'm going to combine into one. I'm going to call this Frame. I'm going to select all the stuff in the basket. Mesh, Combine. Call this, okay, there it is, Basket. That's good. Go here, Mesh, Combine. And Motor, Mesh, Combine. Okay, great. And now I'm going to select all that, edit, delete all by type history. And I can see that I could probably even delete this. And I could group these under motorcycle. And I just selected those, middle mouse, drag them up there, and now I can see that they're under there. Okay? So now that I have each one of these selected, here's the trick. I'm going to do kind of a special code. So I'm going to create a cube here. And I'm just going to create real simple cubes so we can kind of see if it's working. And it's going to look kind of weird in the beginning. I'm just going to put a real simple cube like this. And I'm going to name this cube UCX underscore. And I'm going to look at how I wrote it here. I'm going to say frame underscore 01. Okay. And now I could do this. I could just kind of set this cube up. And once again, this is a very, very simple example. I could kind of go like this. And I'm just going to kind of bring it in like that. And let's see if it actually works. Okay, so you can see here's motorcycle. I could just middle mouse drag that up here. Not that it has to be, but you can see that it's not in the group. It's down here. It's called UCX underscore frame underscore 01. So just with that being done, I'm going to go File, Export All. And I'm going to call this FBX Collision, and I'm going to call this 001 for it's the first collision one that I'm bringing in. So I'm going to say Export All. And now if I come into Unreal, I'm going to go into a new folder, and I'm going to call this collision 01. And I'm going to go ahead and go here and import this. So here it is, collision 001, open. And once again, now I want to make sure that this is unchecked. Otherwise, it's going to override what I just did. So I'm going to make sure that that's unchecked. I am going to make sure that this combined meshes is checked. And I'm going to go ahead and hit import. It's going to take a little bit of time. And then once it's done, I don't even necessarily need to bring it into the scene. I can just double click on the icon and we can go look at the collision. And by the way, if this pops up, that's fine. Just go ahead and close it. Now I can double click on my icon here. And now let's take a look at this. So if I go up here to collision, simple collision, I can see that green box is showing me that it found the collision layer that we brought in Maya. Notice also that it automatically made it invisible. So now let's try this. So if I bring this in here and just hit play, my character should be able to walk near it. Okay, I can see that he can walk through the handlebars because we don't really have a collision layer near the handlebars. And if he jumps up, imagine that green box. I can see that that green box kind of extends here. And he's literally walking on that green box. Okay, now we can see that he fell off of it. And you might notice that, well, he can't push the bike over like in the original example. So I'm going to hit escape. If I wanted to push the bike over, I could select the bike. And over here I can click on Simulate Physics. Notice I just kind of scrolled down here. Simulate Physics and Collisions Simulate Simulation here. Okay, so now if I hit play, now if I come over here, I can have him push the bike. And you can see that it makes sense. I mean, it doesn't look cool, but you can see that how the handlebar went through the ground. Because once again, if you visualize that box that is the collider, that's all that it's calculating. Okay, so I'm going to once again hit escape. And now I'm going to go back into Maya. And let's take a look at some things here. So this box here is our collision layer. Now you might be saying, well, what happens if we did something like this and made it super wide? Okay, like, let's see here. So if I went, I just pressed J to make that snap. And what if I did something like this? Okay, now once again, I don't know why you'd want to do this, but I think this will illustrate the point very clearly. Let's see what happens if we do this. You can see it's named the UCX underscore frame 01. I still have my geometry here. And I'm going to go File, Export All. And I'm going to just call this collision 002. Okay. Now if I brought that into Unreal, okay, I'm going to go right click, new folder, and I'm going to call this collision underscore 02. And I'm going to go ahead and import that. So here it is, collision 02. And once again, I want to make sure that that's unchecked. Combine meshes is checked. Click import. And now it's, once again, it's going to import here. And that secret code, once again, is telling that piece of geometry to automatically be invisible, and that's what is going to be important for calculating collisions. And before I even get, bring it in here, I usually like to double click here. Look at this. So if I go to collisions, simple collision, there I can see this weird collision. Okay, let's see what happens with this really bizarre collision here. So now I'm going to go ahead and delete this one, and I'm going to bring in this one, collision 02. Now if I hit play, if the character walks over, I can see that he gets stuck, right, on the, we'll call it the wings of the bike, and now I can't even get close to the bike. So if for whatever reason you wanted something kind of bizarre like that, like it has nothing to do with this geometry, I can even jump up here, and you can see that I could walk over here. Okay, and now if I walk far enough, there, now I'm off of the collision. And this might even get weirder results if I click on this and go over here to simulate collision and simulate up here, simulate physics. Now if I hit play, let's see what happens. Okay, the bike fell down through the floor, and I feel like I probably can't even move it around. Okay, so you can see that the collision is very important for the interactability of the bike. So now is my job in Maya to kind of make it better, or make it worthwhile. But a few things that I want to point out. So let's see what happens if I did this. What would happen if I started to model this? So I'm going to go into my insert edge loop. And now don't think about this as for the bike. I'm just kind of showing as far as what the collision layers can handle. So if I do extrude, let's see if I make a complex shape. So if I brought this up, and if I extrude again, and if I extrude again, okay, and I'll extrude back here as well. Now, I wouldn't want to make the collision layer for the bike like this, and I'll show you what a good one looks like later, but I'm just kind of showing kind of what the limitations of these collision layers are. So let's say if I was doing it like this, and making this super fancy, okay, super complex. Not that this is super complex, but let's just see what happens if I did this, okay? Once again, this is UCX_frame01, and I'm going to go File, Export All. And I'm just going to call this collision 03. Okay, now going back to Unreal, I'll go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to make a new folder. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in, so if I import collision 03, once again, unchecked and checked, go ahead and import. Okay, great. Now if I double click on this, let's take a look at its collision layer. Simple collision. It might be a little bit different than you expected here. Okay, because if I go back to Maya, you can see that we have all this complexity. I've got things kind of going in, I've got things extruding, I've got all this kind of complexity. But if you notice in Unreal basically said, hey, that shape is too complex for me to think about. So cool your horses. Don't try to be too cool when you're making collision layers. Make simple boxes or cylinders and then call it a day. So don't try to do any fancy extruding. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention because I feel like it would be a shame to do all this kind of fancy modeling and then it's not even worth it. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of one that I did here. So here it is. And you can see here that how I named this. So UCX frame 01. Okay, so all of these are just simple cubes placed, and you can see that some cubes are penetrating. Maybe even to be even safer to not have them penetrating through each other, but it will work if they are. And then you can see that, so what I did is I copied the naming of these, and if the naming was spelled incorrectly up here, don't try to correct it down here. It has to be named exactly the same. You can see here's the wheels. Okay, if I look at that, here's the wheel geometry. And I did create simple cylinders, obviously, for that. And then here's the motor. Okay, just this real simple cube. And these kind of foot pedals right there. And then the basket. Now, These all could have been named, UCX_frame, but I just named them to kind of keep it organized, to kind of figure out what I want here. And that's what it looks like. And if I wanted to isolate that, okay, that's the collision of my bike. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this into Unreal. So I'm going to go ahead and File, Export All. And if I go to, I'm just going to go ahead and bring that into Unreal Collisions. And I'm going to bring this in FBX Collision 004. And now if I come into Unreal, I'm going to go into right click, new folder, collision_04. And then I'm going to go ahead and import collision 04. And I can see that I don't want it to generate, or I want it to have the custom collision. And I also want the combined meshes checked. And I'll go ahead and hit import. And then when I do that, it's going to go ahead and bring it in, and it's going to have all of the custom collisions that we have. And what I'll do is I'll first open that up, and we'll be able to see that. So if I click here, I'll go ahead and close this. I'll go ahead and click here. And now, if I go to collisions, simple collision, I can see all of the collisions that we have in Maya. So hopefully that was helpful, and you can see that this is going to be a lot more specific collisions for you, and that is the way that we're going to do custom collisions.